So, Victoria, I thought we could have a bit of a chat about your current position as Armed Forces Community Covenant Development Officer for Charnwood, Melton and Rushcliffe Borough Councils. So I'm just wondering what exactly that post entails.
Well, it's a really interesting role, Helen. I will say that, and it's been really varied. And I've been in post now 4 years, so it has kind of developed. It's quite organic and it's quite reactive. So COVID has obviously changed the scene, most recently, as you would expect. But I think at a really basic, simple level, it is about that raising awareness. Firstly, of the Armed Forces Covenant, which is a promise from the government and the nation to our armed forces community. They shouldn't face any disadvantage. And I think that's generally, that overrides all the work that we do. But it is about also raising awareness of the armed forces community, their needs, how it's a very different life having served in the armed forces. Transition can be particularly difficult. Isolation and loneliness with older veterans is very challenging. So like I say, it has grown, it's organic, it changes over the 4 years, both working with what we call our beneficiaries, i.e. those members of the community, but also working with the voluntary sector, working with local authorities as service providers, and also working with employers who might employ reservists or spouses of members of the armed forces. So it's a huge role, really, or has been over the 4 years.
Yeah, it sounds it. And I think when we first spoke to each other, I don't think I'd really considered the implications of reservists and spouses as part of the project. I think when I thought Armed Forces Covenant, I really was thinking veterans. Because we as a company, so we are signatories to the Armed Forces Covenant, and we do consider veterans to be a really positive source of recruitment for ourselves. They have a lot of the qualities that we're looking for in enforcement agents, discipline and being able to think on their feet and all that kind of thing. But you really sort of opened my eyes to the idea that reservists have a lot of similar skills, and I don't think people really consider the benefits that they might get of employing reservists.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there are some figures around about the value in terms of training that you get by employing a reservist. Is this training that they're getting while they're in the reserve force, that they then bring to your organisation, and management skills, and again, I think we talked about these kind of soft skills, that being able to work under pressure, being adaptable. I mean, like we employ a reservist in one of the authorities I work for, and we talked at great length about how different is he basically left the army, became a reservist, and came to work in local authority. And he talked, it was really interesting, because he sort of talked about for him how difficult the adjustment was in terms of, it's very regimented in the army, very disciplined and very structured. So he kind of struggled initially with that. But then he talks about the benefits that he could bring around certainly his organisational skills, and his ability to sort of strategically look at things that needed to be done. And I suppose it probably, he off the record, say tighten things up, and using some of his discipline skills. And he is a reservist. And then so the sort of thing we've done as an employee is we allow him to leave early on a Friday. We agile work now anyway, so it's no longer that 9-to-5 environment anyway. But we are mindful that for him to go on his exercise and his training, we support that. And again, that's signatories of the Armed Forces Covenant, having that flexibility by valuing your reservists and what they can bring to your organisation. Also, the flexibility to allow them to go to their training. In the week, we allow our particular reservists to go earlier to attend, and then this time off. Yeah. 2 weeks to go and do the annual camp training, which is a requirement for all reservists. But we feel that the value that we get back, far outweighs the cost of him having that slightly extra time off.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense to me. You mentioned there about the difficulty in moving from life in the forces to civilian life, and I think that's maybe an area that people have sort of at least a bit of an idea of, and why the Armed Forces Covenant is so important. And I think one of the things that really stuck out to me when thinking about that is coming from an environment where you've got a really clear idea of who you need to speak to get certain things done, you know where you need to go to get problems solved. You sort of have a really specific structure around you that you can always kind of rely on. So then moving into civilian life where there's absolutely none of that, and there could be 5 different agencies dealing with really similar things. And so what would you recommend for someone who was trying to signpost somebody for support that had been in the armed forces?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We did a survey, just a very local, small survey looking at veterans. And one of the questions was around who you would go to for help. And local authorities appeared very low on the list, which again indicated to us that perhaps the understanding and engagement with local authorities was quite low. And I think you've absolutely hit it on the head, where you've talked about everything in service life. It is provided for you, and don't get me wrong, the military is recognising that and is modernising that, and gone are the days where you'd get your pay and your food will have been taken out, and all your bills, and because it has been recognised that there are those skills that you need to learn. And actually there is something about preparing from day one for the day that you will leave the military, rather than doing your sort of 10, 15, 22-year career and then, oh, by the way, off you go now. And I think that penetrating the armed forces and the resettlement is probably where that information needs to be. So typically I'll talk about a soldier, that's why I'm probably better informed, is they start their resettlement process 2 years before leaving service, and that resettlement phase is around retraining, upskilling, converting military type qualifications into civilian, looking for work. And there are interviews and there are presentations about transitioning, and we have been flagging, certainly around local authorities, what we do just more than housing, because I think that's what, if someone needs a house, I think, oh, local authority, but actually it is broader than that. I think the big charities, the big 4, certainly the Royal British Legion and SAFA, are often a go-to place that all military personnel are aware of. So raising your presence within those organisations so that they are aware. There is a Veterans Gateway website, I don't know if you've seen it. This kind of like a one-stop shop that, again, the Covenant Fund Trust have paid for, to have this one-stop shop for members of the armed forces community, where they can go on and they could, for with your case, say, put in debt or money worries, and you could be listed there, and you've got an opportunity to put some information in. So I definitely think that linking in with the Veterans Gateway would be helpful, getting information there, and certainly with the Royal British Legion and SAFA, and organisations obviously like Citizens Advice.
Yeah. So, the usual ones as well. No, that's great. I think that 2-year settlement process, that's when you think that considerable numbers of people won't stay in a job that long. That's actually really interesting to think that it's such a long preparation period. And that's just really interesting, that the thought that somebody who might be coming to your business or coming to your advice agency or any other interaction that you might have has potentially been preparing to return to civilian life for 2 years. That's such a massive commitment of time that they've already made to trying to adjust back to the way that we are all living, and sort of taking for granted that people know how to live this way. Do you know what I mean? That's really interesting, the thought of that.
Yeah, and I think that is in recognition from the armed forces or the military, the MOD, that transition is difficult for some personnel, and therefore they do need to start earlier. I'm sure there are some personnel that don't need that level. Some that perhaps don't mentally adjust, because I mean that's life, isn't it? We're all different at the end of the day. But because there are training budgets, and that's slightly dependent on the number of years that you've served around, and the money that you get for retraining. But if you're getting a maximum amount, actually you could spend quite a lot of that time in those 2 years away on retraining as well. There are also there's a new transition, Defence Transition Service, the DTS, which identifies maybe where vulnerable personnel are identified at leaving the armed forces, they get a further 2 years support post military life to try and help them. And they use like a tool, I suppose. I'm sure that's probably not quite the right word, but it's called hard facts. So they look at housing and addiction and those sort of things to sort of I suppose score, for want of a better word, or identify serving personnel who at point of discharge are vulnerable and might need more support, and then they will support them for 2 years thereafter. So and that is casework. So again, sorry, sort of flipping back to your how you can make people aware, they might be another service that could be worth you connecting with.
Yeah, definitely. And that's actually brought me on to something else I wanted to talk to you about, which is again something that came up the last time we spoke, which was around encouraging disclosure from veterans and reservists that they might need support. That we talked about a bit of a culture of stoicism, a sort of culture that being able to manage by yourself, and obviously independence is really, really important to, I mean, human beings in general, but also anybody that's been in the armed forces. And I wondered if you could speak a little bit on that, just the sort of need that we have to make it clear to people that disclosing means that we can support them better.
I mean, I think signing the covenant is, that's a really good first step, because you are promoting, we're armed forces friendly, we've signed this, and I think we've talked before about going through the employer recognition scheme and getting some awards around, because that does promote you then as armed forces friendly. And I would absolutely urge you to do that. We are armed forces friendly. You can talk to us, we're a safe space to talk, the importance. And I think it is about your media, your social media presence. It's around key messaging that across, so that it does cross the line to where you have these perhaps more difficult parts of society to reach, of which the veteran and reservist community could be. That message gets through to them that we shouldn't really keep this. The sooner we deal with these issues, the better. They're only going to compound. And I might make a huge assumption when I say this, is that it's probably that potential link to mental health issues, even if they're lower level. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that you're going to have debt problems if you've got PTSD or vice versa, but I suspect there is a little bit of going hand in hand. So again, perhaps linking in with the welfare charity sectors that maybe specialise in mental health, because they do talking therapies, and things will come out in talking therapy. And again, if you can build that relationship up with working with those mental health charities around, if you are seeing veterans come and there is some disclosure around debt, can we just urge you to encourage them to talk about it? Absolutely. And the importance of, with a lot of issues, let's talk about it, and that might be key. Having sort of that approachable stance.
Absolutely. I think from our point of view, something that we know is so important is people understanding what benefits they're going to get if they do disclose, if you see what I mean, like how it's going to help, how we can support them. And that's something we're really looking at as a business, that people need to know why they should tell us something, rather than us just expect them to tell us because we think that they would want us to know. Like they need to understand why they're getting asked these questions. So that's something that we're really looking at. So you mentioned the employer recognition scheme there.
Yes.
So I thought we'd just talk through that. So there's obviously the 3 levels. There's bronze, there's silver, and there's gold. So just remind me exactly how that works.
So when you sign the covenant, you applying for your bronze, and then you have the silver one. And at each level, there are some criteria and eligibility that you need to demonstrate to get the awards. So there's an application process, and you're supported through it through your regional engagement team. And from memory, I think I'm right in saying silver is where it's about demonstrating that you are supporting as an employer members of the armed forces community, and as a gold holder you'll advocate. So I do a lot of work as a gold holder with talking to other councils, employers, even the voluntary, the charity sector around. Actually, have you looked at the covenant? Have you considered that you may well have armed forces personnel as volunteers within your organisation, as employers? And also you may well be a service provider who is going to reach out and to this member of the community. So yes, it's great for sense checking. You think you're really armed forces friendly, and I say this, having been in my post a while and thinking, yeah, we're great, we do it all, it's fab, they've got me and I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Actually, the employee recognition scheme was a bit of a sense check around, okay, we aren't just talking the talk here, are we? We are actually doing the doing. And what do our policies look like in reality? Are they reflected? Is this embedded across our organisation? So it's all good and well me doing my thing, but are our other teams doing it as well? And have we embedded it? And what do we need to do? And I think going through the awards scheme, I suppose it's always forced our hand, because we then did have to work much broader across our organisation and get buy-in and buy-in from the top. And it's been hugely successful in raising our profile as I think regional sort of experts, and also which then the knock-on effect is that your armed forces community, your customers are therefore aware, but also internally this linking in with veterans and reservists within our organisation. And I think, having just come out of a meeting around agile working, these little connections that organisations have are going to be really important going forward, because we are going to be spending a lot less time in the office seeing people. So actually having some connection, in my case it's the armed forces, and bringing people together that way, I think that's going to be just much more important going forward. I think we'll see much more of that in organisations, little groups of people who work across the organisation, different departments, but might have a common interest that brings them together, and you have these kind of social virtual meetings that nothing to do with work, but you just have this, you all work together and you all have an interest for us in the armed forces. So yeah,
absolutely. And from a community building perspective as well, the conversations that I've had with the representatives of the employer recognition scheme have said that it's a really positive way to attract people to work in your organisation as well. So with the career transition partnership, that a lot of the people who are coming through that are looking to see if you have silver or gold status, because then they know that it's somewhere that they're going to feel comfortable, they're going to feel welcomed. So if people were looking to recruit armed forces, veterans, reservists, spouses, then potentially getting the employer recognition scheme is going to maximise their recruitment potential.
Absolutely.
Like quite quickly, really.
Absolutely. So we have so within our recruitment policies now, if you meet the essential criteria and you have an armed forces background, you are guaranteed an interview. Because we want to attract, because like what you were saying, we absolutely recognise these are the types of people that we want to have working in our organisation, because for all those skills that we sort of touched on earlier, and we want to be attractive to them, and therefore this is one way of doing it. And if you've got a sought after skill and you're looking to for employment, you've got this luxury of being able to actually say, well, I can see they're armed forces friendly, I see they're going to understand my background and perhaps might have a bit of a social network as well, and we have a bit of a buddy scheme. I'm going to apply for them. Why wouldn't apply to them? Why wouldn't I? So really positive.
Fantastic. That's all the things that I thought we were going to talk about. I don't know if there's anything additionally that you wanted to say that Adam might be able to edit on the end now that I've ruined everything.
I'm sure you haven't. I'm sure. Let's have a little think.
Like a final message.
I think one thing I would like to say is that we've talked a lot about reservists and veterans, and I haven't really talked about spouses.
Oh yeah, sure.
And I probably should. It's a bit remiss of me not to mention spouses, given that I myself was a spouse. Yes, and it's really interesting because I attend lots and lots of meetings in this role with nationally and at regional level, and we often we meet with the families federations, and the families federations work within camps of currently serving personnel and support the families, RAF, Navy, Army, families federations. And we often talk about spouses, and we were all saying about they have an immense amount of resilience, military spouses. And you do move around, and you do have to make new friends very quickly. And in my case, certainly, your partner, your husband is away an awful lot, so you do become a single parent for a lot of the time. And again, I think those skills for an employer are, again, that resilience, that sort of focus, that chin up, get on with it. This is a job, this is what I've got to do, this is what we do, I'm used to doing this, I'm used to balancing 20,000 things. Granted, a lot of women are, make good employees, and often have a lot of experience, have worked in lots of different environments and different communities, have that broad, I suppose, that sort of broad knowledge of lots of areas of life. So probably big up the old spouses, really.
I absolutely agree, and it's very remiss of me as well. My sister's actually a military wife, so if she's watching this, she'll be very furious with me, because I completely agree. There's so much sort of being able to plan for certain scenarios that, like, that this thing isn't going to happen, or that this thing's going to happen at a specific time, and then also coping with the unexpected, because things change and they have to react to that. And I think there's an incredible set of skills that you get from being a spouse. So what would you recommend for people who wanted to support their military spouses in their workplace?
So find out who they are. That would be my first question.
That's probably a really good point.
Ask that question, because you may not know, and the same really for for veterans, reservists, connections to the armed forces. So wherever the appropriate point is within your organisation, to ask that question and record it, so that's the first thing, so that and then we have a buddy scheme. So as a new employee, let's just say a new spouse would come into our organisation, they would get a mentor, a buddy that would just be a friend, really, talk to them, link them, just make them feel very welcome, build a rapport, because I think what's really important is that there is an understanding that for certain parts of the year that person may become a single parent. They may be what we call married unaccompanied, so it might be that their other half is based somewhere, and for whatever reason they've chosen to maybe more stability for education for the children, or to stay put, as I call it. So that's tough, isn't it? Because they're on their own all week. Absolutely. Then there's the whole deployment. So again, as a manager of somebody, you'd want to know that actually this person now for 6 months is not only going to become a single parent, you know, potentially their other half is going into a high risk area. You know, it's not, they're not going on holiday, let's face
it. Definitely not.
You know, and they might not be able to communicate with them for long periods of time, and that is tough. And you know, if it is, you know, in my case, when my husband deployed, he deployed on his own. It wasn't like there were sort of 200 going off together. He would join. He was a support wing, so he would join a regiment that was deployed. So I might be the only one. So that this perception that, well, we're all, you know, they've got their own support network. Yes, there are support networks within the military, but it does depend. Every case is individual. So I think it is that, you know, getting to understand the family setup, understanding the person, you know, acknowledging that it's going to be tough, some flexibility, some understanding that pre-deployment and post-deployment, you know, you're going to want annual leave. You know, if your partner's going away for any length of time, or if there is some R&R, rest and recuperation, halfway through the tour, you know, you're going to want to have your annual leave, and you know, being understanding to that and saying, you know, no one's going to sort of stop you. So, and also, you know, sometimes it can, you know, come back and the honeymoon period passes and it can be tough again. You know, everybody's adjusting back into normal life, and in those 6 months, 9 months, you've been mum and dad, in my case, or dad and mum, you know, and all of a sudden, you know, somebody else comes back in, and there's a period of readjustment. So it's a very hard, I think, for somebody that hasn't lived that life to imagine it. It's a great life, don't get me wrong, and there's loads and loads of positives. I don't want to come across as Mrs. Negative, because it is an amazing life, and you meet some amazing people. But you know, it is hard when you're trying to hold down a job and you've got children and you're a single parent, and the military just tells you can't argue, you can't say, well, no, it doesn't suit, you know, and you know, that is military life. It is hard to plan. It can be very hard to plan. Things come up in the military, say you're going on training exercise, you're going, if you're doing. So I think it's asking the question, spending some time getting to know that member of staff, being a supportive, caring environment, and understanding the challenges potentially that they might face, and providing flexibility for some time off when they need it. Does that sort of, I think I might have nipped it in the bud there.
No, that's fantastic. I think that's given us so much that we can think about, and that we can look at how we can just make the workplace so much more comfortable for people who are involved in the armed forces, and support them in doing the incredible work that they're doing.
Oh yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, that sounds great.